Welcome to Equine Assisted World. I'm your host, Rupert Isaacson, New York Times bestselling author of The Horse Boy, The Long Ride Home and The Healing Land. Before I jump in with today's guest, I just want to say a huge thank you to you, our audience, for helping to make this happen. I have a request. If you like what we do, please like, subscribe, tell a friend. It really helps us get this work done. As you might know from my books, I'm an autism dad. And over the last 20 years, we've developed several equine-assisted, neuroscience-backed certification programs. If you'd like to find out more about them, go to newtrailslearning.com. So without further ado, let's meet today's guest. Welcome back, everyone. I've got Kansas with me, Kansas Carradine. It's always a massive treat to be anywhere in the vicinity, even virtually, from Kansas Carradine, because she carries a certain light with her. She's not just a master horsewoman. She's not just somebody who has brought the compassionate side of the horse world many steps forward. She's not just those things. She's also someone who carries a technology with her that, if you're involved in the equine assisted world, as we are, it's a necessary technology for us to understand, and it's HeartMath. This is not the only thing she does and not the only thing she offers, but it's something I think I want to start with this conversation, because HeartMath comes up a lot in the horseboy and taquine trainings. It comes up a lot in quite a lot of other modalities, but a lot of people are a bit unsure about what it actually is, how it actually works, and why it's a thing. So it's silly to have me explain that, because I'm somebody who benefits from HeartMath rather than being a practitioner of HeartMath. So those of you listening, if you are involved in the equine assisted practice of any kind, it is something that I think one needs to understand. And it is something which I would actually encourage you to add to your modalities and actually take a course in. But let's start with why that might be a good idea, and then we'll take the conversation from there. So Kansas, thank you so much. Tell us all about it.
Thank you, Rupert. Thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, we all carry around with us our connection to source, our connection to the energetic world. We're all energy beings. And when you talk about HeartMath, they've been putting around research, and it's really two things. You talk about the HeartMath system, or it is a modality, but it's also an institute of research.
Right.
So the organization at HeartMath and the scientists there have really been very interested in the energetics of communication, the energetics of how we relate to each other. The heart itself is an electromagnetic organ, so it's always broadcasting and receiving. And I often say, in the equine world, horses are very well known for sensing our fear, but they can also sense other emotions, right? So they can sense our appreciation. They can sense our compassion, which you spoke already about. They can sense our patience. They can sense our self-importance and our arrogance. And all of that is being broadcast very subtly, and they're picking up on it all the time. And I first stumbled upon HeartMath actually at a retreat, a spiritual retreat in Los Angeles with a teacher named Gangaji. And I met one of the practitioners, as you mentioned, so people who've decided to study the science of the heart. We talk so much in the poetry about how the heart has meaning and a science. It gives us a sense of courage, right? In French, cœur is heart. When we're full of heart, we're full of
Courage,
care. We're connected.
from the
Yeah,
heart.
we're connected to that heart power, and it can give us really a motivation. It gives us energy, and it gives us a sense of inner alignment, right? So connected to our purpose. And what they found, the Institute researchers, is that heart coherence is a measurable state. That just like in a symphony, the conductor of the heart is creating an organization between all the organs and actions within our body. So when we're connected to something that we care about, connected to our purpose, connected to the sense and the feeling of appreciation, it actually organizes things within our being. And that creates an even tempo to follow. So I love the marriage of bringing this into the equine therapy work, especially with horseboy method, because so much of it is about creating rhythm. And that organized rhythm, that tempo, like humans who are involved in dancing or posting trot, sitting in a collected trot in the piaffe and passage and the high school movements, This is all creating a sense of tempo and rhythm within the body, and your heart is doing a similar thing all the time. And one of the ways that we practice that is also consciously, because it happens accidentally when we're connected to things that bring us joy. When you are connected with your cat who comes up on your lap, for example, or you're just appreciating like the beauty of a landscape and watching the natural world, you are experiencing a sense of ease, and that creates order and rhythm. But then we can deliberately do that also by noticing breath patterns. So there's an integrated with your breath pattern. In fact, right now, all of the listeners can just focus their attention on the chest area, the heart. And there's actually over 40,000 different neurons within the heart, this intrinsic cardiac nervous system. So there's a tiny heart brain that is really recognized. So as you collaborate with your heart intelligence, just focus your attention there. And as you breathe, imagine that your breath is flowing in and out through the chest area. And just a little bit slower and a little bit deeper than you usually do. And invite in an even inhale and exhale. So for this practice, we want the breath to come in through the heart and out through the heart at an even and equal pace. And just that 30-second pause of slowing down right away begins to balance the autonomic nervous system. And we can take it a step further by connecting to our care. What do you love? What brings you joy? What inspires you? Or what makes you laugh? Before we started the recording, we were talking about laughter. And it's a great medicine because it's a portal to the heart. It creates a heart opening. And practicing that on a regular basis reminds us the sweet spot. It's the same feeling that we get when we're experiencing lightness in the saddle, that we want to continue to, our muscle memory continues to seek that out. And then the very interesting part of the research, because there's lots of different domains that the Institute really has focused their attention of study, but all of our emotions have an impact on our body, and they also have an impact on the social energetics that we share in the room with. So some people are doing Reiki, some people are working with, hands-on balancing of the energetic systems. And the heart is working within this unique electromagnetic field environment that we can feel when we are in each other's space. So there's a very famous picture that people send around that has this toric field, right? So about as wide as you can stretch your
What's a
hands.
toric field? Not everybody
This
knows.
toric, this toric field is there's it's like an apple core of energy that is coming up and out from the heart, rising up in front of your body and extending out as far as you can with your arms. And that's the measurable pulse of the heart radiating. And depending on what we're feeling, whether it's joy or gratitude or potentially fear or sadness, there is a unique energetic fingerprint to the feelings and emotions that we're broadcasting out into that field. Well, horses being so much larger than we are, their hearts also broadcast a much wider field, which is one of the reasons why we're in the presence of a grounded, coherent horse, and that's very important, why it feels so good. Now, if we're in the presence of a horse that is in a state of fight or flight, a horse that's been abused, who's, I gave the example yesterday when I was giving a talk. Here in the American West, we're still rounding up Mustangs and separating them from family bands and whatnot with helicopters. So if you were surrounded by that horses that were in that type of fight or flight survival mode, panic state, one would not feel the same very low frequencies and that same presence as being calming. So it's very important to understand that the coherent broadcast depends on the individual, the being. And then there's also this important component. There's two terminals, right? So when we're connected to our appreciation and the facilitators are doing that, they're creating a safe space. Some of the people that I work with, I love, they talk about creating a failure-free space, which is very much, I believe, what Horseboy Method aims to do through all of its programs. The human's facilitation of that, along with the horse kind of being that fuel, that energetic, where the facilitator is guiding that energetic of compassion, of safety, of care, of understanding, laughter, love, all of
Well-being.
that,
Yeah.
well-being. That's what's the magic ingredient that's creating some of these interactions. And we're going to hear more and more about research studies from HeartMath as the instrumentation becomes more popular within the equine therapy sector. I'm confident of that. There's different documentaries where they're talking more and more about it. But again, I love you saying it's a modality that we can add on. There's more to just the breath practice, but that's really the primary component.
I was
And
going to
we
ask
can
a
all
question,
add
but
that on to what
I
we're
don't want
already
to.
doing.
I don't want to.
No,
I
go
don't want
ahead.
to interrupt. Please finish that thought, and then I'll go with my questions.
Yeah, just I love the fact that it's an add-on to what we're already doing. So it's not something that you have to stop and say, okay, well, I'm practicing this. That means I can't do this thing at the other time, right? As I'm riding in the saddle, and as I mentioned, I was introduced to this 20 years ago, and it became such a personal technique that I was using to my equine entertainment interactions, right? So I was a acrobatic stunt rider with the equestrian show that was touring around the world called Cavalia for many years. And we worked with a lot of stallions, and we had one of our shows, we had like 70 head of horses, all geldings, many of them stallions. It's a very strange environment. When I first got there, I thought, this is way too, where's all the mares around here? But we had lots of women in the cast and, of course, in the stables doing a lot of brilliant work. But there was a lot of masculine, strong energy. And so and I wouldn't say the control, we talk a lot about like self-control and self-regulation, and that comes from a very rigid, dominating mindset, really. But it's about how to partner and how to blend with these energies because we wanted to have this full-bodied equine and we want their feisty nature, and it's beautiful. It's why people come and
Yeah, you
pay
want
tickets to
passion,
see
and
that,
that's
the
why you have the
passion
stallions. Yeah.
and the unexpected quality.
Mm.
I always tease that we're only used to working, with the eunuchs, the geldings, and people don't even like to work with mares. We don't like the full hormonal experience that equines bring to us. It's
Interesting that I've never
unpredictable, and to
understood that.
blend with that.
I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, I don't like mares." It's like I love mares. I've always loved mares. I've never understood
Right,
why people have
right.
these weird attitudes. But I can
Mm,
understand how if you've got a traveling show with a bunch of stallions, that if you have mares coming
that's
into
right.
season, this could introduce danger for
Certainly,
people. Then
certainly,
practically, it's probably you're choosing one
exactly,
or the other. But yeah, yeah, because of the confined
exactly.
spaces. Yeah.
Right, right. There's lots of factors that go into that. And then when I was also navigating through my own mental health, and nobody was talking about mental health at that time,
Mm.
but I was looking at HeartMath as a way for my own emotional self-regulation, just
Is
to
that
make it
why
through
you
the day,
found?
added it on. Correct. I
Okay,
was
because
not
that's
seeking,
the
how
question
can
I
I
had.
be a better horse trainer? I was not looking around seeking new modalities. At that time, I was just like many people trying to make it through the day, trying to make
So how
things
did
stay.
you, but we find many things when we're looking for solutions for our mental health thing. And it's just playing pure devil's advocate for the breathing exercise, which is totally sound. We know it works. I just did it with you. I felt it work. A skeptic would say, but those breathing exercises have been around forever. Why is this heart math thing,
Mm,
trademarking something which, is just something which we do. We all know that if we take a deep breath for a few seconds, things are going to go better. Our heart rate will come down, blah, blah, blah. That's what a skeptic might say. Now, you and I both know that what heart math have done is start to measure and prove. And
mm,
one of the great contributions that science makes is
mm,
often not so much the breakthrough discoveries, it's about often the confirmation of why the common sense thing that we've been using forever works. So that
mm,
when someone comes along and says, actually, you've got to hit kids to make them work, then you can say,
mm,
no, here is the science about why being nice to kids
mm,
actually makes them learn better. Because that's sort of why we need these things. So the skeptics, when they say, oh, well, we know how to breathe, it's like, well, yes, but you don't know why it works. And if
mm,
you know
mm,
why it works, then when someone comes along and is yelling at you in a horsey situation, and you say to them, or in a therapeutic situation, because it does happen, and people often yell when they don't even think they're yelling, and you say, well, actually, look, if you do it like this, it'll be nicer and it'll work better. And then they go, well, if one has the science, then it doesn't last as long and we get change. So one of the great things I think about the HeartMath Institute is that they have put measures on things. So I'd like you to talk us through that a little bit, but also just talk about, you don't have to, tell us the absolute nitty gritty of your mental health stuff, but what was the main nuts and bolts of why at that particular time you were looking for some mental health answers? And then how come you found that as opposed to other things that people find, I'm
Mm,
curious, always curious to find, what's the system of happy accidents by which
mhm.
people fall into the good technologies that they find. So first, a little bit of your story, however much you want to share or don't share is fine. And then into how you actually, why it was this and not something else, given that you're in California where there's a smorgasbord of good mental health stuff available.
Certainly, certainly. Well, one of the things that I want to go back and rewind is you talked about like why does it work to a certain degree when
Mm,
you use a strong force, shouting or corporal punishment and whatnot. And that was actually one of the questions that I had, and this is interrelated, as why is it works with horses? Because I was never willing to be the person who would go to that extreme. And the
mm,
people who would, obviously they get a lot of times quite fantastic exemplary results to a certain degree. And I was very curious about that question. Like, why does this type of training seem to have high levels of success? And I was working with, or excuse me, I was speaking at a conference and I met Dr. Stephen Peters, who I know you speak about a lot.
mm.
And
One of
he
my
said
heroes, yeah.
something to me, even though that I had been studying heart math for probably about 2 decades at that point. He said something that really connected the dots and just, turned off a bunch of light bulbs. And he said, we need a little bit of sympathetic arousal in order to have that engagement for learning. And that really got my attention because I had been learning about the autonomic nervous system, with I'm sure many of your listeners also are. So the parasympathetic and the sympathetic are two branches of the autonomic nervous system. And one
Vagal
of them
nerve,
is
yeah.
responsible for the acceleration. The other one is that parachute. I could never remember it until someone said the parachute is gently bringing us down to earth.
Hmm.
And you spoke about how there's lots of breathing exercises, and many of them work. And when we want to slow things down because we're in a hyperventilating state or we've had a fright, maybe someone's fallen off of a horse, you really want to slow things down by doing that double or even longer exhale, right? That's putting the brakes on our system. And there's other techniques, those who've traveled in India might have done some pranayama breathing. And when you have fast, accelerated breath, that's creating an awakening energy. It's like having a
Mm,
cup of coffee. You're like, okay, I need to wake up without the caffeine,
hmm.
right? So our breath, we don't really understand all of the mechanisms of it. And it's more than just relaxation. So that's a really important point. HeartMath is not a relaxation technique. For some people who are in a high level of stress with all of the work that we have to do and the phones and the EMFs, yes, we need to soothe the nervous system. But that's not what it does to someone who is in a shutdown state where their parasympathetic is locked in. It can actually start to create a little bit of an increasing energy, or what I love, thank you so much to Stephen Peters, is it creates that little bit of sympathetic arousal,
Yeah,
which we
excitement.
need. And
Yeah.
then we get into that sweet spot. So that's why it's the balancing. Okay. And I say that a lot because I think people really fetish being in parasympathetic all the time. But someone who's depressed, and now I'm circling back to your question, like I was, does not need more relaxation.
Mm,
Okay.
mm.
And so I
Yeah, because you
had,
need to move
um,
from where you are. Yes.
right, right. And what is interesting is the heart has this adaptogenic response. Adaptogenic meaning it is a tonic that will come in to either create that nerve, a nerve tonic like ginseng or ashwagandha. These are herbs that will either soothe the nervous system to be able to rest and sleep better at night or to be alert enough to handle the tasks during the day, whether it's going to school or going to work and whatnot, right? And so the heart has that same adaptogenic response. And I first discovered it, or I should say, I was a spiritual seeker. So beyond my mental health, I was just trying to find meaning in life, right? And so, quite interesting, my ancestor was actually a minister and had written oh gosh, like 24 books on the sanctification and on his relationship and walk with Jesus. And they're still in print. They're still highly valued. Beverly Carradine was his name. He had, I
1,000
think,
books?
5 to 7. He wrote like 24, like 24 books on the sanctification.
Oh, two
Yes.
dozen. Okay, right. Sorry, I heard
24,
2,000.
24.
Whoa, he was
No,
busy.
24. Sorry. Yeah. No, that would be quite extraordinary. It would be, yeah.
He'd still be
No,
going, I think.
but
Yeah,
still,
yeah.
24, and the fact that there's anything in print,
Two
from that
dozen
Carradine is
when
interesting.
was that? Beverly Carradine?
He was in the late 1800s.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll look him up.
in the South. He
Making a
was a
note now.
Southern minister,
Okay.
and so fascinatingly enough, I had been raised around a lot of, I guess, more esoteric introductions, whether it was from Eastern thought and Eastern religion. And then my mom was a very devout Catholic, and my grandmother on my father's side was Christian Science. And so a lot of influences in that way, and this desire to, you know, understand the unseen. I'll just put it that way. Whatever your search for is with spirituality or something that's a
Hmm.
little bit mysterious, we're trying to understand the unseen because we
The
spend
ineffable.
so much
Yeah.
time in our education focusing on the 3D, focusing on that which is tangible, and only really relying on our visual sense. And so there was this intuitive thing that was inside that was encouraging me to turn and look inward and get to exploring the inner mysteries. But when I turned and looked inward, it was not a pleasant place. It was not a happy place. I was really distraught, and there was a lot of imprinting and conditioning in my youth and in my childhood that were really traumatic. And so, like anyone, I was trying to cope with the best strategies that I could. I did not have stable, parenting. Both my parents had a lot of addiction and substance abuse that was very distracting for them to parenting. And then when I was 11, I ran away to a horse camp in the Central Valley of California, and I ended up being raised by the people who owned that horse program, and they
Did your
happened
parents
to
sort of
be in the
breathe a sigh
rodeo
of
world.
relief when you did that and say, okay, now we don't
They
really
didn't have
need
a
to?
they
But
didn't
what
have
I
a
mean
choice.
is,
It's a
did they
very
like arrive in a car and say, get back in this car, young lady? Or did they sort of say, actually, she's following her heart. This is cool. We trust these people. See
My
you.
dad did that. My mom was already out of the picture at that point, so
Okay.
she wasn't really a player. But my dad did that, and it really came from me. So I went to this horse ranch, and I may have spoken about this before on
You
different
have,
other
yeah. But
podcasts,
tell us again,
which is
because
why I talk about it in a kind of like, oh, this is that old story.
the
But it was a really
reattarant.
interesting moment. So I'm in sixth grade. I was asked, or I was my stepmother at the time, my evil stepmonster, who, bless her soul, was the catalyst to get me into this horse ranch because she was from that region. So someone said, hey, if you want to get rid of your stepdaughter for the summer, this is a good place to send her to. And so I went to this ranch for 2 weeks, and I was living, breathing, and just digesting horses constantly. And the first thing that we do, I thought I was more of a hunter jumper. And so I showed up in breeches and a helmet. And the first thing that we did is put our swimming suits on and ride the horses bareback down to the river and swim the horses. I mean,
That would
it
make you
was
want to stay.
amazing. It
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
sensory exercise. I was like, I never want to leave.
Yeah.
And we started at 7 in the morning, and we had another session, at 7 p.m. because of the hot days in the Central Valley in the
Mm.
summer. So we were swimming with the horses every day. We were learning timing to be with them in that rhythmic sort of way. And there was a massive amount of rigid structure. And so for 7 years, I went to summer camp and never came home. And basically, when I went back to go into the world that was chaotic and without purpose and meaning, at 11 years old, I was strong enough to say, I don't want to do that. I want to go back and stay at this horse ranch. And so I advocated for that. And that was where my dad was involved. And he called the owners and, is this really okay? Can she move in? They said, yes, absolutely. We've done that a few times. They had had over 2,000 different students, and there was maybe a handful of kind of wayward souls who, for different reasons with their families, had actually moved in under the roof of the trainers. And it was basically, a gentleman and his wife. And so
This is
it
the
was very,
reattarant.
very rigid. That was Rieta Ranch, yeah,
Yeah. And it was
which
rigid, you
they
said.
have passed away. It was extremely rigid. It was extremely strong. It was exactly what you were describing of that yelling in order to get things done. Very, very kind and compassionate to the horses, very, very harsh and condescending and disparaging to the riders.
Yet you wanted to stay.
Yet I wanted to stay because I had had no no care. I had had no boundaries. And so there was a part of me that really embraced the structure, the
Can I ask a question?
regularity,
When you
and the
said,
horses.
here's a question quickly. When you said you showed up in your hunter jumper outfit and they said, put your swimsuit on, we're going to go swim with the horses, that sounded, yeah, there's obviously to do that safely, you need some structures and some good horsemanship, but that didn't sound rigid. So then
Mhm,
you said, oh, it was very rigid. So I was like, oh, that doesn't
mhm.
sound, So can you just, what was
Right.
the paradox there?
The paradox is I was staying because of the horses. If there's listeners right now who've been in any discipline, and maybe it's not even, horses, maybe it's gymnastics,
Mm,
these sports that are known for having very, very strong discipline and structure, especially in
hmm
the 80s, right? The Bella
mm,
Caroli kind of era. But we're in it because there's a love, there's a passion for the
sure.
actual sport itself and a
Hmm
love for the horses. And even though the
hmm
sport was supposed to be this trick riding discipline,
And the
to be able to be
self-development,
free and be
you
on
could
the
see your
horses
skills
was amazing.
expand, right? Yeah.
Most certainly. And there was a large amount of praise of saying, okay, we are going to develop you. We are going to focus on you. I believe in you. You can do this. Because it's an interesting thing about a coach, and I'll rewind that back into the equine therapy sector too, because as a facilitator, you see the possibility in another being. And so your vision, the visionary aspect of the facilitator, the caregiver, is that I know you can do this.
The
I see
recognition
something
of
that you don't
talent.
see in this moment right now. And that's what even a strict coach or trainer is doing. There was a moment where I was asked to do a full bridge back bend on a horse at a gallop in a big arena, and I had been practicing in it in like a 90-foot round pen. And he asked me to go do it. And I probably could have in that moment, but I was scared and I said no. And I just remember like, that's too much for me. I'm not ready to do that trick yet. And I had to train for it for like over a year, maybe almost a year and a half. And then when I finally got to the point, but he had trained me and trained me, I know she can do it. I know she can get there. I see something in her that she doesn't see yet. He saw the potential, he saw the aptitude, the talent, and all of those things, in the mental aspect as well. And so I think that aspect of the leader who was at times it was almost like there was a lot of love involved, there was a lot of care, but it all came through this tough love and through a lot of very abrasive, we were not allowed to talk, and that really imprinted and seeded, this contrast of suppression. And so
Talk
I wasn't
during
allowed
the
to
coaching,
express.
during the training sessions, or talk ever, you were silent for 7 years.
We were pretty silent.
Okay.
And so that
Was it when
suppression
spoken
in that
to?
presence. So in the presence of the work container of like being at the ranch, then after, after school, in school and with other people, I was very, very loquacious. And so I was always known for being, you talk too much, you talk too fast. And I was encouraged to really be quiet in the way. It's like, okay, shut the F up and listen inward
Got a
to
question,
my
not a
mind
question, but
change.
something that we need
Oh,
to make
okay.
clear. Okay, so for the
Yeah.
people listening, the Riata Ranch, just so you have some context, that they weren't just doing this in a vacuum. What I mean by that is this was a display team. This was a professional team that was going around the country, really, and doing these trick displays at a very high level. So just some context there. It wasn't just this isolated place in the mountains where they put kids through a sort of Shaolin type horse experience for its own sake. It was indeed a money making show. The second thing is that this is a question. You were going to school in this time, or they homeschooled you at the ranch?
I was going to public school.
Okay, so you'd get up in the morning, you'd go to school, you'd come back to there, and you would then begin your work with the horses once you arrive back at
Yes.
the ranch.
Yes. And what you said about the Shaolin school is actually really apropos, but go ahead.
Then, well, usually when you're in a monastic environment like that as a kid, there's a bunch of other kids going through it with you. Was that also the case? Was there a sisterhood? Or were you the only one of your age who was living there? And the rest was older ones who were living elsewhere, coming in and being part of the team? Like, how did that work?
I was the latter. So I was the only one who was living there, and I stayed up at the house for those 7 years. And with the really loving embrace, with the loving embrace of the the main trainers. His name is Tom Meyer, and his wife is Vicky. And Vicky was just a gem of any loving caregiver that you could ever imagine and write in a
So you
storybook.
were getting that nurturing.
Apple pie and all of that. Absolutely.
Because
And
you painted a picture of harsh discipline
right.
using humiliation and screaming and so on.
Oh yeah.
Where was that coming in? What was the balance?
Yeah, so when I say that you said the Shaolin school, because there was a methodical aspect to it. There was a massive amount of importance placed on every single detail.
Indeed.
So the way that we raked the pattern in the yards, the way that we put up all of our tools, it was very systematic. And that rhythm, that expected rhythm is therapeutic. So I can say not all of the 2,000, or rather over 3,000 students who passed through the threshold, going over the railroad tracks into this ranch, had the same experience that I did. They had different upbringings and then went to their families at night. And I basically went, I had very little visitors from family because they were like, okay, Kansas is there. It was kind of an afterthought. So I was largely alone and I was dealing with my own abandonment issues. And in the loving presence of, sweet Vicky, as I mentioned, there was definitely a healing that occurred on many, many levels. But I was somewhat of an only child. They're very much raised that way. And these other girls came in and out, and we developed a sisterhood. And yet I was always kind of set apart in a very different category. And also because of my family upbringing and whatnot. And so the suppression, I would say, of being able to talk and mental health wasn't discussed. There was no opportunity to, have a counselor, anything like that. It was very much the philosophy of, be tough as nails. If you're experiencing any pain, stuff it, continue. The show must go on, like was really the moniker that I didn't start to really dissect until much, much later in my life.
Okay. So there was this balance between tough love and actual nurturing love, enough that you, in the 7 years you were there, could function when you went out into the world. Why did you leave there and go on out into the world? And where did you go out into the world from? Because I could imagine that there was a career structure and you were from a bit of a showbiz family anyway. And Riata Ranch is also showbiz. So why? And then you went into showbiz with Cavalia, took all that training and discipline that you got from Riata into that amazing Cavalia show. So why didn't you stay with Riata?
Because there was a part of my soul that knew that it was soul crushing, I would say. I actually wanted to leave earlier because I wanted to pursue a Broadway career. I really fancied myself a singer and I
Does
wanted
that
to
mean you're
quit
going to give
at
us a song?
No, it's not. Maybe someday,
Candace
maybe
is
in
going to
person.
give us a song. Thank you so
Kansas is
much,
going to
Kansas, for
sing.
letting us know that.
Yeah,
I'll sing one if you
it
do.
was, you'll sing one in this moment right now.
But
Somewhere over the rainbow. No, I can't sing. It's
yeah, that
five
was
in the
good. Keep,
morning.
keep going, keep going. Somewhere
That's
over the rainbow.
okay. Now my performance anxiety is coming up, which is why I learned heart math to make those
All
things
right,
go
so
away.
I'll
No, just
kick off.
kidding.
All right, go.
Um, somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. Okay.
That was beautiful. Your
Well,
voice
when
is
I'm talking so
beautiful,
fast, we need to slow down. And
and
singing brings rhythm. Singing tones
it
the
does.
vagal nerve, right?
I always sing to the kids when they're in front of me in the saddle. I sing to my horses. I sing all the old Scots-Irish lullabies that my mum used to sing to me, and it calms me as well as them. And of course, when you're
Mm,
body to body, because they're up against my chest with their back, so all the resonance from
mm,
my throat and diaphragm goes in. And of
yes.
course, that was me being comforted as a child, and then I comforted Rowan that way, and then it's gone into our practice. But absolutely, but
Mm.
you have every right to fancy yourself for Broadway, and perhaps you still should, because that was really good. And I might ask you for some more. Okay,
Yeah,
but
but
given that,
singing, and that brings a really good point. So, right, so singing was kind of like my medicine of the moment.
so
And I
you would
did
sing to
want to
yourself.
sing. I did need to sing. I sing all the time. So I was in a magical choir in high school. I was
Okay.
doing some plays, and I wanted to move to another location
Got it. So
that
you were doing some
was
drama
more
at school.
focused on correct. Right.
But given that this was a show, the Riata Ranch was a show, why didn't they say, "Oh, she's a talented singer. Let's incorporate that into the show"? That would have
It
been the
just
obvious
wasn't
thing
that
to do.
era because if I had joined in the 70s, they did have a band that toured around, went to Equitana, Germany, and was, singing, and they recorded tracks and things like that. But it was a different era, so I just wasn't a part of that particular era. There wasn't really the resources and the team,
Okay.
focusing on that in particular. And it was so all-consuming. We were working on acrobatic stunt rising, Roman riding, and then spinning lassos, so lasso roping.
Mm,
That in and of itself is its own, 3 full-time jobs.
sure,
So
sure.
I understand that as well. If you want to master anything, you kind of have to have tunnel vision and let go of some other things.
True, but if I'd
I
been the
did
person
fancy
running
myself
that
as a
show, just
right.
and you'd been living there, I'd have been like, let's have Kansas open the show with a song. I mean, that's just a
Right.
no-brainer.
I
Yeah.
look back and I go, I should have been singing the Star Spangled Banner. We were
I
already
mean,
dressing up in red, white, and blue.
no-brainer,
But I
right?
did it. But
Crowd
I
goes
did it.
wild, yeah.
And here's the thing is instead of creating a story about it that was, oh, this was, tragic and this was my wound, if you will, it created a certain level of density, intensity within me,
Mm,
that created a different type of catalyst within my life. Right? So initially, that energy was stored up inside and suppressed. And so fast forward to when I was discovering, heart math and seeking to understand the inner world a little bit more. The interesting thing is the person that I met wanted to learn more about my stories in the same way that you are. She goes, "Wait, you were raised on some horse ranch? Wait, who were these people? Wait, you did what?
mm,
You made this decision when you were 11 years old? Tell me more about that." So she was interviewing me very similar to the way you were, and she is a dear, dear friend to this day and a wonderful friend of the heart. And so it was really going back to that question, why were you seeking out some sort of solace? Why were you seeking out some sort of relief from
mm,
really the torment of the human experience? It's because all of the suppressed emotions that I had of
mm.
abandonment, of anger, of being told, stop singing, it sounds bad. I was told that through for the 7 years all the time.
The run.
Um, yeah, and I guess it was sarcastic, but it was still seated all the time. And, I can go back and laugh at it right now, but there wasn't a two-way conversation.
Yeah,
So you just
100%.
kinda take it and stuff it. And
Yeah,
then by the time I was in my early 20s, why did I leave? It was because my spirit was crying for a transition.
got it.
And that transition was actually, really dramatic in the sense that I graduated on a Thursday and moved out on a Sunday and
Okay.
didn't wanna look back. And it took some time. I did look back. Within a year, I was back, performing over in Europe at Cheval de Passion, which is in the south of France. And I actually ran into Fred and Magali there, and the early Lorenzo, who was only with 4 horses. Lorenzo, the Flying Frenchman,
Yes.
Roman riding, and he had lines and whatnot. His horses were not at liberty as of yet, and that was in '97. So I was still doing shows, but I wasn't living on the ranch and I wasn't doing the day-to-day operations, which was
So
very
you
much
still
geared
you
to a
still hooked up with
younger
them
population.
thereafter, the relationship endured. You did go and do performances with them.
Correct.
Oh, that's good.
Correct.
Okay.
And I was still devastated, at my trainer's passing, at Tom's passing, because he was the first person to believe in me, to really care and spend some time. And there was genuinely, he never ever said he loved me until about a week before he had a heart attack and died. And
Mm,
out of the blue, we were having a conversation. We talked infrequently, maybe once a month or every couple months. And we had a conversation on the phone, and he's just said, "I want you to know, Kansas, I love you." And it was like, what? Wow, okay. And it was very tender. And then within the week, he passed.
it is so strange to me, isn't it? I grew up in a school of tough love as well,
Mm.
but I never had any sense as I was growing up in that school that that was in any way effective. And I had no desire to pass that on to my children. Like it's funny, I meet people who say, "Well, my daddy and my granddaddy were like this," and I said, "Well, then why are you like that? Because it's just shit." And it's like when you were growing up, you must have known it was shit because tough love hurts, and it's just often It's just often a cover smokescreen for meanness and bitterness. And
Right.
kids recognize that. Kids are not stupid. So when I was growing up with that, it was not so much my parents, it was more other people who were in my sort of tribal system, but with a lot of influence and power. And then, of course, the school systems I went through and all of that. But I never for a moment thought, yeah, that's a good idea. I remember thinking, well, no, that's not a good idea. And you're intelligent people. It surprises me that you think it's a good idea, but I'm not going to do that myself. You obviously the same thing, but I guess what's sparking this is that it took him, 1,000 years to say, I love you to someone that he loved, which is bananas, really. Just sort of shows what bananas, culture we live in.
And it's
Uh,
cultural. That's the thing to
indeed,
understand. I don't
indeed.
shame the being. It's all
No, no,
essentially
it's true, and
conditioning.
it's the same with the people but it just always surprises me. Like, I don't know, there were many things growing up around me, like, I don't know, apartheid, and because my
Mm,
family's Southern African, I didn't think, well, just because my forebears did it, that's a good idea. I'm going to keep doing it, anymore. That's just what surprises me, that people are
yeah.
intelligent and pain is
Mm,
pain. And yes, you can say it's culture, but at the same time, we do have the option to step outside of culture. And hell, I mean, that's what the whole American experience to a large degree was people coming over
mhm.
from Europe and breaking with what they perceived as the negatives of their culture back home, including poverty and oppression and feudal systems and things, and then setting them up on the other side of the pond.
Well, and let's
Yeah,
let's also acknowledge that there was many, very devout, very rigid and structured individuals and sects that were
that
coming to
is
populate America, and they
true.
wanted to be able to have their,
Is
you know,
yes,
kind of
their little
cultish
dystopias. Yeah,
continuation without the oppression of any
you've just
other
made a really
influences.
good point there. A really good point. I think it's something that we should just develop quickly because it is true that founding of Anglo America largely was religious fanaticist Puritans who had actually been in prison in the UK under King James because they were just considered like too extreme. And indeed they were, because they ended up killing King James's son, Charles I, in the English Civil War later on, and putting in a Puritan government which banned Christmas, among other things, and under Oliver Cromwell. And then people put up with that for about 30 years and went, fuck this, and got the king back, the king's son back from France and said, let's never do that again. But those blokes who had been in the Clink jail in England under King James were put on a ship called the Mayflower and sent to New Haven, Connecticut, and told, thrive or die, but don't do it here. And of course, so your point about America having a history also with fanatical disciplinarian sects
Mm.
was a really good point to make there, because it does run, I think, through a lot of people's experience. And when we're talking about the equine assisted world, we're dealing with a lot of people who are products of that,
Mm.
whether
Of
it's
that conditioning.
indeed many of whom run ranches. Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So
And this
thank you
brings
for
me
making
back
that point.
also to my question with Stephen Peters is why does it work, right? Why does it create, and it works to a point. So I was the shutdown horse, right? Because that sympathetic arousal, it makes you alert. It switches on. Okay, I need to get into that state of hypervigilance. So your senses are keener. Your reflexes are faster. You're not going to second guess and hesitate. And if you second guess and hesitate when you're on a horse who's running full speed, at liberty in, a 200-foot length arena, and you're about to dive off of it and hit the ground and flip and land somewhere or do a full bridge and stand up against the force of gravity, and there's 5,000 people, and then on the other side of the arena there's announcers and they're having bull riding going on and the cowboys are doing all of that. There's a lot to going on, and knowing how to focus and zone in is not unlike the training that we see in combat, in
Sure, it's
military.
exactly a
And
combat soldier,
so
good combat soldier,
trick riding, it took me a
elite.
long time to realize. So my dad, we talked about the Shaolin connection, right? trick riding is actually a martial art form.
Indeed.
People used to ask me, did you do any martial arts? I said, no, I didn't really do that thing. My thing was horses. But my thing with horses was acrobatic stunt riding coming from the Cossacks. And it was all developed for warfare and to have
Indeed.
these incredibly agile soldiers. So when I, at 11 years old, I was like, okay, Dad, I'm joining the cavalry. That's basically what I was off to go do. And there was a methodical aspect to it.
Yeah.
You know, there's repetitive qualities. It was, if anyone's seen the film The Karate Kid, wax on, wax off. We did far more raking of poo and leaves than we did of actual riding.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's true with any barn, I suppose, because there's more chores than actual riding. But it
Indeed.
seemed like there was weeks on end sometimes when we were doing chores.
Well,
Uh-huh.
but the ritualization of them for skill set training, yes, as is
Yes.
martial arts thing. You're absolutely right. You were being trained to be an elite soldier. So because there's cavalry who were not so elite and cavalry that were very elite, I'd say that you're absolutely right about that step tradition, the Eurasian step. The Cossacks actually got it from people further east, and it's still practiced. The Cossack culture is largely broken down, but it's still practiced very much in Turkmenistan and Kyrgyzstan and places like this. And it's really worth looking at the Nomad Games. Have you ever checked those out? The Nomad
Oh,
Games?
I've just seen little clips of it, but there's quite a lot.
Absolutely bonkers, right? So it's all of the countries that make up the Eurasian steppe from eastern Turkey right across to, I guess, Mongolia and China, and all the countries in between, all the ones that end with istan. And they not only do all of that acrobatic trick riding that you're talking about from the military tradition, but their military tradition, but also things like Kuk Paru. Have you ever looked at Kuk Paru? Rugby on
I don't.
horseback, where they call it Bushkazi in Afghanistan, where you've got a
This is
carcass
similar
of
to
it.
horseball,
It's
except
well,
with the carcass.
and with sort of death being, acceptable.
Oh, the
So
ultimate. Oh,
it's like those early forms of football, like Florentine football or the Shrovetide football in Ashbourne in
wow.
England. There's medieval forms of like no holds barred, any injury is allowed, blah blah blah. And so Cook Paru is a rugby on horseback where you got to pick up this 70-pound goat carcass and try to get it into a large concrete ring, which can also your horse can like fall into. And you do this at full gallop, and you can like if some of the person's on the ground, you can just run your horse into them. And of course, this of course was the training of the steppe horsemen that conquered the world. No
Mhm.
surprise that they did. But yeah, you were going through a form of that. So I could absolutely see how it formed you into an absolute machine of perfection and performance and bravery and technique. And at the same time, you'd have had to suppress a whole bunch of sides of yourself to take it to that level
Mhm.
because there was also not so much of an element of choice. But there must have also been
Mhm.
a part of you that adored it, that loved it, or you wouldn't have been able to pursue it to that degree, no?
If you're in the equine assisted field, or if you're considering a career in the equine assisted field, you might want to consider taking one of our 3 neuroscience-backed equine assisted programs. Horseboy Method, now established for 20 years, is the original equine assisted program specifically designed for autism, mentored by and developed in conjunction with Dr. Temple Grandin and many other neuroscientists. We work in the saddle with younger children, helping them create oxytocin in their bodies and neuroplasticity in the brain. It works incredibly well. It's now in about 40 countries. Check it out. If you're working without horses, you might want to look at movement method, which gets a very, very similar effect, but can also be applied in schools, in homes. If you're working with families, you can give them really tangible exercises to do at home that will create neuroplasticity when they're not with you. Finally, we have taquine equine integration. If you know anything about our programs, you know that we need a really high standard of horsemanship in order to create the oxytocin in the body of the person that we're working with, child or adult. So this means we need to train a horse in collection, but this also has a really beneficial effect on the horse's well-being. And it also ends your time conflict where you're wondering, oh my gosh, how am I going to condition my horses and maintain them and give them what they need, as well as serving my clients? Taquine Equine Integration, aimed at a more adult client base, absolutely gives you this.
Right. I think
So
there's a certain
ambiguous.
amount of versatility that I always appreciate. And,
Mm.
I was actually born in the year of the horse. A lot of people are talking about how this year's the fire horse, and that's
Are
very
you a fire
wonderful.
horse too?
I'm actually an earth horse, not
I'm a fire horse.
surprising.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Oh, you're a horse as well.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
we tend to be a little bit wild and have these big bursts of energies and go off in different directions. And, it's
I
very
don't know
famous
what
for
you
not
mean.
wanting to stay within the fences, like the breaking, jumping over the fences, like what fence?
Fences are just
And so I
yeah.
like versatility. I like keeping things in dynamic.
Mm,
And so I was kind of like, all right, I did that from 11 to 14, 15. I want to do something else too. And it was the mandate to stay with just this one art form. I'll put it that way. It was really,
mm,
I wanted to explore other forms of art because the
mm,
art of horsemanship is absolutely, in my
mm,
opinion, on the level and on par with, fine painting. It takes
mhm.
as long to develop fine art skills of painting as it does, or sculpting as it does to understand the art of horsemanship.
Absolutely.
You know that very well with bringing a horse through the levels. It takes that
Yes,
amount of
well, and
time.
as Nuno, the great Nuno Oliveira said, I've got him sitting right here. Here he is. There's Nuno.
Okay.
He said where it differs is that when you write a book or you make a picture, it endures.
Hmm.
When you create a horse, with the passing of that horse, the canvas is wiped clean, and
Yeah.
you must begin again.
Yeah.
And I suppose you could say the same about, say, a human dancer or so, or
Hmm.
something. But even that dance, so it there's a poignancy to it, I think. Yeah, the
Hmm.
equestrian art. You, of course, are both a dancer and an equestrian artist, because it's not just a martial arts. It's also, I would argue, that really good trick riding is a form of dance, and dance with the horse, not just the human by themselves with their own body and nervous system.
Hmm.
So okay,
Hmm.
so you're coming out of this, you're exploring, you want to go to Broadway, you sing beautifully, you want to do these other things. You're from an acting family anyway, so why wouldn't you? And then you discover HeartMath. So you come out of this highly disciplined, highly self-actualized upbringing, but with its other issues. And you're looking to go into other forms of the arts, also with horses. And then you meet somebody who tells you about this HeartMath thing. So, how did that happen? And why did you think, because you must have looked at other forms of, mental health, personal development-y things. Why did you think, yeah, that one. Yeah, I'm going to go with that one.
Well, well, I think there's still a stigma around mental health for me at that time. And
Mm,
so I didn't know, we didn't even call it like I'm looking to take care of my mental health at that time. I just
sure.
knew that I was feeling suffering of the human experience and I wanted to ease that suffering. And
Yeah.
I was not looking through traditional means because I'm untraditional. And so I wasn't seeking out a psychotherapist
Hmm.
or a psychiatrist. I was seeking out, spending times with First Nations people, and so I spent time with long dance and was
With long
with
dance?
women and grandmothers.
What's long dance?
It was a ceremony of women that took place in the Central Coast, or I guess it's Southern Coastal region. So it was more Chumash land, but there was
Yeah.
many people who came from different regions.
The Chumash Indians, for
They're
those who
just
don't know, by the way, are the ones
more
who created
dominant.
the coastal strip of
Southern coast, yeah, between
Southern
Los
California.
Angeles
Yeah.
and really extending up past Santa Barbara. It was quite a large region.
So you you
Um,
you sought this out.
Mm. And I was just very connected to, indigenous wisdom, we could say, and so
Mm,
Native American spirituality. And then I was also, starting to meditate. It was interesting as I was moving to Los Angeles to try to become an actor because it was always my dad's dream that I would continue this legacy, right?
right.
So I was taking acting classes in Hollywood, and somebody said, "Hey, I could get you a job at this really posh sushi restaurant in Sunset Boulevard. You make great money, you make great connections." And so, okay. And I showed up, and it was right after September 11th in the United States, and there was a line about a quarter of a mile long with professionals with attaché cases and people in suits. And these people had families, they had children to feed, they had mortgages. And I took one look at that line and I was like, okay, I don't need this job that bad. And so I went back to my little studio apartment that I had at the time near the beach And I found an ad in the spiritual magazine, where you get crystals and learn about different healers and things like that. And someone said they needed an assistant. So I applied and I went to work with a woman who channeled, off-planet energies. And she worked with crystal healing, and she did something called theta healing, which was all about DNA strand activation. And that was where I was going to work. And so I was already in that vein, and just seeing that we're in this human experience and there is suffering a part of it. So how to ease that suffering.
But okay, the woo woo that like the oat woo woo that you just described there, the sort of, California channeling people and so on. So much of that is BS, and there is also parts of it that are anything but BS, and all points in between. Easy to knock it. A lot of it deserves knocking, and yet there is a skein of truth running through the whole thing, and there is the occasional person out there who actually is a channeler, and there are lots of people who aren't and say that they are and take people's money. Similarly with animal communication, there's some people out there who are
Absolutely.
absolutely the real deal. I've met them, you've met them, and other people out there who are not. Okay.
Yeah.
What
And
made you think
I
that
think
this?
as horse people, I have a sniffer, right?
Yeah,
And perhaps just growing up in an environment where you did have to be on alert all the time, we start to feel into the unseen, to sense
true.
authenticity. And so I have even though I'm highly gullible, and don't use that to your advantage at all, I'm very, very gullible because I want to listen to people and believe them, but I also listen to my heart, and I have this
Yeah.
sense of whether
I
people are
think you're
being
only gullible in certain
authentic.
moments, probably. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it probably doesn't
Um,
last very long. Yeah. Okay, but are you saying then that you had a decent BS meter built in?
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
Correct,
Okay,
yeah,
but so
and I
this
just
woman,
followed this intuition, a lot of times we don't really
indeed.
think about it, and on a cognitive, it's just, it's like me moving in with a horse ranch. I just was like, "Oh, this is part of my destiny." Like, yes, that's chapter 17 of the Kansas experience.
Got it. But when someone says, I need help, I'm a channeler, a part of one might say, as a young broke, but okay, that's a job, I'll take it. That's great. It sounds
Well,
kind of
so here
interesting.
you go.
But did you actually think she was? Do you think she was actually the real deal? Just out of interest?
Well, the ad was very straightforward. It was just, I think it was listed as something like healer intuitive,
Right.
is looking for an assistant, admin assistant for this much and this many hours a week. So it was very, very straightforward.
Sure.
And no matter, even if you're, in those other realms, you also, at the end of the day, you need to pay your rent and need to get those things
Indeed.
taken care of. And so what I really appreciated about her is that she had actually been a journalist for the Wall Street Journal.
Okay.
So,
Interesting.
and she in the 70s, and so 70s, and I believe early 80s, and then she moved out of that and started channeling, and then took that as a full-time job and full-time
Why did she
position.
start
And so
channeling, and
she
was she
had a
the real deal?
balance.
Got it.
Yes,
She
and
was
she had a
grounded.
balance of being grounded in actual 3D, we could say,
Mm,
a very strong intellect, and she had also studied extensively and had a very, we could say, coherent and clear connection to source, whatever you want to call it. And in that sense, it was always about helping people awaken to the truth that we are all connected, that we are all embodiments of love, and that there actually is much more beneath the surface than this 1% of our DNA that is totally different, that we focus on
100%,
all
but
of
not
those
everyone who believes that
differences.
channels.
Correct. Yeah.
So who was she channeling, and why did she go the channeling route? I just
She didn't focus on a particular entity.
Okay.
You know, I think at that time there was, and I think everybody channels. You channel at some points when you're like, "Oh, where did that come from?" Right? We get connected to
Indeed, but I
source and
don't
it comes
I don't
through.
put out a business card saying Rupert Isaacson channeler. And as
Certainly.
you know, at that time in Hollywood, and even now actually, there are people who like, I channel, as you say, this entity.
Mhm.
There's a bloke who's big at the moment, Bashar, but there've been others. Ramtha was a big one. And I keep an open mind on this.
Mhm.
And at the same time, I have a chuckle. It's both.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
think
Absolutely.
ambiguity, and particularly those of us who are working in the equine assisted field, the whole point is you've got to sit with ambiguity. Things can
Mm.
be both like BS and true at the same time. And if one becomes comfortable with that, then one can operate on this multidimensional level. And if one
Mm.
can't, then one is always a bit limited. But it doesn't
Mhm.
mean that healthy skepticism is just a good thing. Cynicism is not a good thing. Cynicism is the coward's way out, because it says anything I don't understand, I will dismiss, because it
Judgment, it's closed-minded, and it doesn't allow for anything else to penetrate.
exactly.
Right.
And I just want to stay where I am, and I want to keep you where you are. But healthy skepticism is like, I'm allowed to make a bit of a joke about it, and at the same time hold space that it might be true at the same time. Because, whenever I've been around really good shamans in the indigenous world, and I'm sure you've had this experience too, they don't take themselves seriously, like at all. They are the healer that I was the closest to, Besa. I mean, total joker all the time about himself, not just about other people, and didn't remotely take himself seriously, but could pull cancer out of people's bodies and all sorts of other things. But he came from a tradition where that was if not, I wouldn't say it was normal, but it was that sort of non-normalness was in the culture, that type of healing. So I'm just curious about quickly your experience with this lady, because you must have witnessed her doing her thing, and that must have been part of your education. So and then informed the later work that you did to some degree. Just talk to us just a little for a few minutes about it, because these are the natural questions that people listening will have. You're an intelligent woman, Kansas. Why wasn't it BS? Blah, blah, blah. Just talk to us about that. Yeah.
Right. Well, I'm just following that nonlinear aspect, and yet stepping into work with her was very simple. Of like, okay, these are some files that I need documented into my computer. So I was just
I'm
doing
not
basic
talking about that
admin
side
work.
of things.
I no, I understand, but I'm telling you, this is the relationship that we had on a day to day. Here's some tasks. I'm going to be doing sessions with my clients. Here's some crystals. When I finish working with these crystals, I'm going to energize them, and you're going to package them and take them to the post to each individual. And so I got to learn, and then we went to the imports where these crystals would come from, Brazil and China and all the stands that you spoke about, all of these rare, amazing gems that are creating this kaleidoscope beneath us. I got to see when we were opening them out of these 55-gallon containers, and they're all just these incredible treasures, and she revered each one of these as beings. And we would get to walk throughout the aisles of these massive warehouse in Southern California, and then she would kind of be touching in and communicating with them, and then she would collect what we would take back that would eventually be part of the inventory to give to her clients. And so my role was very much of the assistant in all of the tangible sense. Kind of like, if Merlin had someone who was a scribe or something, that's really what
Yeah,
I
the
was
sort of lab
doing.
assistant.
And so you learn, yeah, exactly.
But if you were the lab
then she
assistant of
did
Merlin, then you'd
conduct
also
these.
see him materialize a dragon or two, right? So yeah,
No, so we didn't have so many of those kind of shamanic experiences, and because I was also not interested as much in phenomena. I guess I would say, like, people like, all right, do something to prove yourself. Like that really was never something that drew me. And I've certainly been around a lot of other shamans who have produced lots of sort of phenomena, some of whom are now engaged in legal problems. So it's not to
interesting.
say that somebody who's capable of creating phenomena is a pure being, right? And that's a
100%.
really important distinction. And
100%.
so I really did feel that she had a very grounded and clean heart, and the way that she spoke and how she operated from felt very much in integrity. She was acting in
But did you see
integrity.
her channeling, I
And
guess is
then
the point I'm trying to make. Did you ask? Did
I
you see
did.
that?
So when she would have workshops,
Mm,
and I was helping checking people in, and it was actually the first time that I really ever meditated. I was like 22 at the time.
mm.
And then she would go into a quiet state with eyes closed, and she would share a message. It wasn't from one particular being, and it was really an off-planet energy that was saying, you have all of the resources that you need. You are surrounded in divine love. You, as beings, are extremely more powerful than you could ever imagine and that you see. And we're here to help and guide some meditation processes to help you connect to heart, to the feeling of oneness. And so it was really the first time that I was aware of vibrational modalities, right? I started to feel, because when you suppress a lot and when you haven't had nurturing love, you often have numbness as a coping strategy and as a byproduct of that. And so I was very numb. I didn't have any feelings really at all, like not pain as well as, extreme feelings of like emotion. Then they start to come back online because that's the intelligence of, the healing or evolutionary process. But when someone would ask, like, do you feel your heart? Do you feel this warmth? And I couldn't turn inward. It was an uncomfortable place. And then later, it actually ended up being this overwhelming emotion, which is a way that unprocessed, undigested experiences can sometimes get stored up in our body. And so, emotion would come with it. So, what it was a beautiful gift for everyone present. And there were small groups, like maybe, 15 people, right? This was not somebody who was going in front of like 30 people at the time. That was a modality that I think certain people were interested in at the time, channeling as a modality to connect with source and to be of service. And yes, I think she was authentically of service. And the people who were there were learning how to connect with the source in themselves. And that was always the message. And the
Got it.
source in ourselves, I would say now, is we have the heart that is our primary connection to our souls. And knowing how to access that feeling state is a way to start to connect with our larger self.
Yeah, absolutely. As above, so below. Okay, so you're there in this world, and this is the point at which you discover heart math, right?
Yeah, yeah, that time, yeah.
So that's an interesting jump too, because heart math, one of the things I love about it is it sits squarely on that continental divide between the woo and the non-woo, the rational, the irrational, which of course any good science does. My own uncle was an eminent pathologist at a University College Hospital in London, and when we showed the Horseboy movie to the family, I thought he was going to take a big old poo all over me because he's that sort of dude. And at the end of the showing, I went up to him with an imaginary umbrella and I said, "Surf's up, take a shit, do your way, right? Go on."
Yeah.
And he went, "Actually, Rupert, this time I'm not going to take a shit." And I said, "That's unlike you, Uncle Peter. This is a golden opportunity. How could you pass it up?" And he said, "Well, a couple of things. One is, remember, this is almost 20 years ago. You've produced a piece of work saying that autism actually might not be the end of the world and actually might have some real gifts attached. That's quite interesting." And he said, "The other thing is you've drawn attention to a really interesting aspect of the placebo effect." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, Rupert, you probably don't know this, but most people misunderstand what the placebo effect means." I said, "Well, what does it mean?" He said, "Well, most people dismiss something and say, oh, that's just the placebo effect." He said, "What they don't know is that the entire system of modern medicine, allopathic medicine, rests upon the placebo effect. And we don't know how it works. It's completely irrational to us at this stage of our scientific discovery." I said, "Go on, please explain." He said, "Well, Rupert, easy. When you go to see a doctor, you get a prescription. If you get a prescription, you get a drug. That drug has gone through a drug trial before it's allowed on the market. In that drug trial, there are different populations that it is tested on, and there are also placebos that other control groups are given to see if the drug makes more people better than the placebo." And he said, in the early stages of any trial, the placebo always makes more people better. And they don't just think they get better because they're stupid and then die later of the thing. They actually get better. We don't know why. However, it's not allowed for that drug to go on the market. It often has to go through several iterations until it makes more people better than the placebo. So he said the placebo effect is something very real and very good. And it's possible that these shamans that you're looking at, Rupert, have some ancient technology of some sort of activation of that we don't yet understand scientifically, but hopefully at some point we will. That was the absolute bridge between a hard scientist, and he's a hard scientist, and but also a good scientist saying we don't understand everything yet. So one thing, that's what I love about heart math. So you also made that bridge. You were going from something that was intuitive, irrational, and then you're then making a leap over to something that allows for that, but also allows for the rational. So tell us about your early experiences with HeartMath.
Oh, well, as I mentioned, it was really for me, and it was just very casual and private that I was learning about these techniques. And one of the first ways that you share the teachings about it is just to understand kind of the car that we're driving. And now so many people are learning about the nervous system. I mean, you can even talk to little kids in school and they have, sensory rooms and they have places where they're learning to breathe. And it's amazing how far we've come. But this was like 25 years ago. It was not as much, so common. But I was in Los Angeles, so it's a little bit more common in terms of the woo-woo that is very, and I always like to say it's more esoteric or the metaphysical. It's really what we call it, or new
Yeah, but
agey,
woo-woo is just
right?
more fun to say. Yeah.
Right, woo-woo. But the first step to it was really just understanding how the nervous system works and
Mm.
understanding why we are having some emotional reactions, why other people are behaving in the way they are, because I'm just going to blame you because you're just a hard ass and you're this and that. Well, no, actually, there's a very specific conditioning that has created that unique outcome or that unique terrain in the individual. So first learning how our systems work, how our amygdala in our brain, the limbic system can kind of hijack our higher minded cortical thinking. We had talked about the reptilian brain, but not really to the degree. It helped me have more compassion for the people around me, such as, the very brilliant and loving but hard, tough love coach that I had, and anyone else, and myself. Right? So the first step was just the understanding, and with understanding and knowledge, we can have some sort of acceptance. We can have some, mutual harmony. We begin to soften, really, and then be able to take the next step of, kind of life. We let something in because we're not bracing up against everything. Or, like you had mentioned, just closing ourselves off to new perspectives by fixed judgments. Right? So I received the information about the HeartMath system taught in a very simplistic way. It's also almost like kindergarten. And I find that, some people might not be attracted to pedantic methodology because it just seems too simple. Like really, like come on, like it's just too fluffy. But the truth of the matter is I started being interested in their evidence because they had spent so many years really grounding the science and the data to show like, look, this actually has an effect. It reduces blood pressure. Look, this actually helps with anxiety. Look, it actually will help sleep. And this is how it's working. We're measuring HRV patterns. And so HRV is heart rate variability that a lot of people have been paying attention to now, but they could develop a medical grade device that not only measures your HRV, but then takes it even a step further to measure really your power spectrum, which is really like the force of your heart. So I might be able to get coherent, but the force of my heart will determine on the clarity of my focus. A good example is, my coach who introduced me when her father passed away. She could get coherent. She could move into a state of optimization in that flow state. But the strength and the power and the force of her heart as she was going through grief was greatly diminished. Does that make sense?
It
And that's
does. It
measurable.
does. And I wanted you to clarify what you meant by the force of the heart. So just keep going.
If you're a horse nerd, and if you're on this podcast, I'm guessing you are, then you've probably also always wondered a little bit about the old master's system of dressage training. If you go and check out our Helios Harmony program, we outline there step by step exactly how to train your horse from the ground to become the dressage horse of your dreams in a way that absolutely serves the physical, mental, and emotional well-being of the horse and the rider. Intrigued? Like to know more? Go to our website, heliosharmony.com. Check out the free introduction course. Take it from there.
Yeah, so that power structure, and what they noticed is that when we're really, in alignment and having the power, the strength, I akin it to a magnifying glass. When you're seeing the sun focus through a magnifying glass, if it has a very wide field, it's going to create warmth. As soon as you get it to be able to focus, it has enough power that like a laser, it can start and ignite a fire. And so that's what can happen when we really are this is what, when yogis are focusing on drishti means one-pointed focus awareness. And it's a capacity that we have with our intellect as humans to concentrate. Okay. So when you concentrate your heart energy and you can practice that skill, you have a more efficient output that can be measured in its force, its heart force. And so when you're connected to your care and you're like, okay, I really love this person so much, I really want the wellness, and you're sending a coherent form of love, of support, of compassion, of encouragement, that has a measurable effect, right? And now they're starting to measure its effect not just on the planet, but on trees, and hooking up sensors on trees so that when we're sending our heart, our loving energy, our care, that it actually is received through the sentience of the tree, and there's other responses. So that's really where the researchers now from HeartMath, they're like, okay, we've made this body of work for humans. That's great. It's doing this. Now we really want to focus on the impact that the human heart power and the human coherence, heart coherence, has on the plant nation, because that's a little bit easier to measure than, say, rocks at this point. There's probably ways to measure it, but we don't yet have it. I'm sure the shamans that you have worked with and that I've been around who don't take this themselves seriously, they talk very specifically about the rock people as well as, the plant nation. So I just find it
Well,
fascinating
it's
because
interesting that you bring up plants because, of course, plants and animals, we are in the hunter-gatherer context, we usually have a relationship. It's been measured by various anthropologists with about three. When I say relationship, I mean a close relationship with about 300 species at any one time across plants and animals. There are lots more out there, but those 300 are usually the ones that are most closely bound up with our survival and thriving. So nutrition and medicinal. And because don't forget that eating the right animals is also medicinal. And I could go into that. Because, so for example, in the Kalahari, porcupine is a very sought after medicinal food because everything the porcupine eats happens to be a medicine for humans. So everything that's inside the porcupine is a constant condensation and synthesis of all of those drugs, if you like, that natural pharmaceutical cocktail. So therefore, if you eat that meat, it is very good for you, as opposed to something that eats things that are not good for you. So that's easy to understand. What's so easy to lose is the reciprocity. So all systems within nature, right, are in reciprocity with each other in symbiosis. Even what appears to be parasitic, there's always some sort of underlying symbiosis. And the biggest example of that, I think, that's come up in recent times is the whole, the mushrooms, the myelin, not myelin, that's in the brain. The myco, oh God, Rupert, the web,
fantastic fungi,
the
mycelium.
Mycelium, thank you.
Mycelium? Okay.
The network that binds, it seems, the whole planet, and the trees pass nutrients to each other through the mycelium network. But the mycelium network itself gives things to the trees and gets stuff itself, and blah 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 blah. And we think we're apart from that. Of course we're not. But yeah, as you say, if you trace back just a very recent history of the last 200, 300 years since these particular branches of religious hardliness have come in, one of the points of all those religious hardliness was to sever those connections, or the perception of those connections. You can't actually sever them because otherwise you die, but any more than you could stop breathing oxygen. But nonetheless, if you had a wise woman who understood, all of those herbs, well, you put her to death, obvious thing. If you encounter native shamans, well, you Christianize them, and if they weren't Christianized, you put them to death, and so on and so on, and then you get your industrial system going. So it seems like a revelation to us when mycelium networks have then come back under the eye of science, or that the landscape and the trees could observe us at the same time that we're observing them, that they could be sentient, that there could be a central bank of consciousness. It's only recently that people have even begun in our culture, not in ancient cultures, to allow for the fact that consciousness is something that we tap into, but the human brain does not create. Whereas up until quite recently, your upbringing, my upbringing, we were told the human brain creates consciousness. We know that now that's not true at all. So it's interesting that HeartMath begins to measure these things. You, I think, turned me on to this study, which I just pulled up off Google. I think it was you who turned me on to this study. And I think this one really crystallizes for people that are having trouble understanding what we're talking about here. In 1997, going back a ways now, the University of Kassel, which is in Germany, in Hessen, Germans, so they're not known for their woo-woo, this study suggested that individuals practicing specialized heart-centered meditation, just as you described, just as you showed us at the beginning of this conversation, can emit 100,000 photons of light per second from their chest. I'm going to read that again. A 1997 study from the University of Kassel suggested that individuals practicing specialized heart-centered meditation can emit 100,000 photons of light per second from their chest. This is claimed to be significantly higher than the 20 photons per second observed in average individuals. Methodology: researchers used a photomultiplier tube to measure light in a dark chamber during heart rhythm meditation, just as you had us go through, where practitioners focus on the heart and send, in inverted commas, love and light. Findings: the study claimed that focused emotion and intent can increase biophoton emission, biophotons, I love it, from the body by a factor of 5,000. Context: while human bodies do emit low-intensity light known as biophotons or ultra-weak photon emissions, UPEs, that in this case reported high-intensity emissions are what was being measured. Scientific reception: of course, some people accepted it, some people didn't. But the fact is, 1997, 100,000 photons per second, as opposed to a normal 20, just going through these kind of. So this is the kind of thing that HeartMath went off and studied. Okay, this was the University of Kassel, but many of these things were also used by and to some degree funded by HeartMath Institute. What was the history of HeartMath? How did it come about?
I mean, I think it would be great at some point to connect you with some people actually at the Institute
We
so
need
that
them
they
on the
can
show for
explain a
sure.
little bit more about it. Yeah.
But just in
They've
brief.
trained certain practitioners. So there was a group of meditators, and they were from South Carolina, North Carolina, and they had all centered around a guide named Doc Childry. And one of the meditators of that group was a scientist, research scientist, very, very interested. And I believe it's around the time that like TM was being very popular. So TM being transcendental
Meditation. Yeah.
meditation, and different communities who were just really interested in, yoga, Eastern thought, and the mind, body, spirit connection. What is that about? And so this particular researcher named Roland McCready, who's the chief scientist at HeartMath, basically said exactly what you just described in that paper. We want to start to create more evidence to understand what the impact is of a being who is at peace, of a being who's connected to their heart, and why that's important. And so they started to decide, like, okay, well, we need to actually, be able to create an instrument to measure something. What can we measure? And so I don't know the whole history of it, but it started with their main biofeedback technology, which is the first of its kind. So biofeedback in the sense like an EKG monitor, but this was just measuring heart rate variability. Because most people, like I did, it's common, you would think that the heart is just 60 beats per minute, but that's just an average. The heart is constantly speeding up and slowing down and adapting. You don't have to think about it. If you want to run, your heart's going to increase. If you're slowing down or you're going to sleep at night, it's going to go down to a slow rhythm. So your heart's always adapting. But what we don't realize is that with the power of our breath, we can create a much more even, organized tempo, similar to that conductor of the orchestra that I mentioned at the beginning. Or when a rider is teaching a horse to be in piaffe and passage, you can teach them to dance to the music. When humans decide this is just coming into my mind and how to articulate it, because I couldn't articulate it for a long time. It's the power of human talent to create music, to create order, the tribes that create shamanic songs and rhythm. It's like we live in this chaotic universe and it's beautiful and it's wondrous. And then we have the power to create organization within it, with Mozart being able to download all of these incredible symphonies. But if everyone was playing separate lines and they were out of sync, it would be a mess. Right? So the heart organizes things to be this symphonic masterpiece. And then in a way, we're creating art through our hearts. And that's when we get this 100,000
Putting the art in
photons,
heart. Sorry.
Right? Yeah. Or the fart in heart at some point.
Well, there's Mr. Methane who puts the art
Yes.
in fart, but yes, that's it. Yeah.
Yes, sorry. Yeah. But I've always said, like, there's all kinds of things that we just can't measure yet because we don't have modern instrumentation,
Yes.
or
Yes.
they're relegated to labs and universities and things
Yeah.
like that. They're not available for the commoner. But I believe that we're just still using kind of medieval technology, but there's actually quantum instrumentation
Yes.
in the labs and the universities all over the place. It just hasn't become as in the household of each individual.
Well,
But
you say that
eventually,
though.
the
I
shift
think
is happening.
feedback at plant, devices now are more and more. I
More
remember the first one
ubiquitous.
I was ever, first one most of us ever saw was an EEG machine, right? And they'd been using
Right.
those forever to measure brain waves for epilepsy and so on and so on and so on. That's a biofeedback device. But I remember that it's 25 years ago or so, someone showed me something called a scanar, which came out of Russia,
Yeah.
which was used to heal injuries for the Russian athletes. And then after the wall came down, slowly those devices appeared on the market in the West. And I remember that she was German, another German, and she
Mhm.
showed this to me. And I was like, yeah, yeah, my usual yeah sort of way. And then she said, all right, ended up with a brown recluse spider bite on the side of my face that wouldn't heal. And she said,
Right.
bet you a pint, Rupert, this will help. I'm like, can't turn down a pint. Worst thing that happens is no pint. So, or the worst thing that happens is I have to buy you a pint, which means I'll probably drink a pint at the same time. So how can I lose? So I used the device for 2-3 days. Took it away with me on assignment. I was off to Honduras to write a piece. When I got back from Honduras 5 days later, the bite had the whole infection, the whole lot just gone, and it'd been getting worse and worse and worse. So I was like, okay, clearly something in it. And then I've been using them ever since. And then there's like the Beamer blankets, BEMER, that open up blood capillaries that our mutual friend Linda Tennington Jones turned me onto. So I think those biofeedback devices are coming more and more. Vets use them, doctors use them, as you say.
Certainly.
But
Totally common. It's awesome.
neurofeedback, I remember when I was going through some challenges a few years ago, I ended up doing some neurofeedback, and rather than therapy, and my God, I could feel my brain change. I could feel my thoughts change. I could feel thought patterns getting kind of flushed out, as if one was washing them down the toilet a little bit. And of course, that's very similar to what goes on in shamanic ceremonies. You now use, and so I think we can accept that heart math is a thing. They can measure whether it's photons from the heart, whether it's focus power, whether
Heart
it's
rate variability.
heart rate variability, and so on. Now let's look at the practical aspects. So somebody is running a equine assisted thing somewhere. How are they going
Well, I
to use
just want
heart
to
math?
pause because you brought such a great point, and it actually brings into the question that you are intuitively going to lead into, is that everything is energy, right? And that really can't be refuted, even though
Sure.
we think that these things are solid, that there's
Yeah.
vibrational matter that
Everything
is
is
making up matter.
vibrating.
Everything's vibrational.
Yeah.
And so what we're looking at with HeartMath terms is we're just paying attention a little bit more to the frequencies of emotion, and we
The
are made
frequencies
up
of the
of
vibrations. Yes.
right, right. And so we have, most water is a conductor within our body, so we're feeling these frequencies all the time.
Mm.
And you were just speaking about, the vibrational qualities that shamans can tune into, and that's something that you train. But the population that is highly, highly sensitive, they might not even be, on neurodivergent or whatnot, but just when you're highly sensitive, you're feeling vibrations all the time,
Mm.
right? And we're talking about the impact also of, EMFs in our field, like all the Wi-Fi signals that we have going around, all of the different chemicals that we're putting into our food and that chemistry that it creates. And we can't really measure it or take into account. It's almost like a homeopathic, because we're getting small, small doses of environmental toxicity and all of those things. And you have widely imagined in your world and your industry, seeing how these have impact, right? So it all these subtle things that we are starting to really pay attention to. This is why it's becoming more important. The reason that it's so beautiful in a way to use the heart math understanding and system as a component when we're working with both animals and nonverbal individuals. It hones our nonverbal communication to focus on the feeling of, because it's really the felt sense. When we say consoling words to someone, it's the feeling that we're after, right? So this
Mm.
kind of lets that fall away and allows us to connect with, I already said it many times, connect with our care, connect with our purpose, connect with our love, and just notice that safety needs to be present. Well, guess what? We can attune ourselves as an instrument to feel into the resonance of safety, to connect with the feeling of gratitude. So a lot of people say, "Oh, you're around horses, that gives you some sort of, superpower, you're going to be enlightened." I'm like, if all horse trainers, just by association with horses became enlightened, we would have a very different world, a very different equine industry. So it's not just being around them alone. It's this other X factor that I mentioned at the beginning of our talk, which is when you are feeling that real sense of compassionate latitude, when you're feeling that sense of understanding and care, when you are connected to being loving and kind and being helpful and wanting to be there for service. In fact, one of your videos that really impacted me, Rupert, is when you said something about tuning your whole life into now service and how that's created its own magnetism, its momentum. It's connected you to a different purpose. And that's what I would say HeartMath is measuring. Yes, your care really counts. And the more that you can focus your power spectrum into a coherent, ordered rhythm, that has an additional amplified in impact. So it's similar to when you can have regular unleaded fuel or you can have rocket fuel. And so when you're doing a session with someone and you're aware of the sense of grounding and being able to communicate that to the parent, to the caregiver, and also able to communicate that resonance of safety and connection to the horse, you're setting an environment that has that much more harmony in it. It helps harmonize beings. And there's a lot of research that HeartMath has also done where you teach the technique to, say, a couple individuals and put them in a room and everybody's hooked up to sensors with individuals who know nothing about the technique. And all of them will entrain to each other. They will all begin to sync up and organize and become what is called this coherent state. And even though some individuals don't know anything about it, and that's what happens when we come into an organization, into a herd, you can feel a barn or a stable that is like, "Oh, I really want to be here," in resonance. You can feel the resonance of family. You can feel the resonance of dignity. You can feel the resonance of all are welcome here. I certainly feel it at Square Peg around Joelle and Becca and their
Oh yeah,
organization,
those of you who
right?
don't know the Square Peg Foundation, check out our Live Free Ride Free interview, or was it Equine Assisted World interview with Joelle Dunlap? Anyway, look it up, Joelle Dunlap, Square Peg,
Absolutely.
genius lady. Yeah, yeah.
Right? And similarly, it's a resonance that a field that you walk into when you see a stable that's filled with judgment, that's filled with suppression,
Mm.
that's filled with all of those type of anxiety and a lot of criticism. That's a felt sense as well. So the more that we can pay attention to this, learn about it, see what coherence can do not only for the individual, but also for our horses, okay? Because when we are very purposeful about our intention, purposeful about the power of our heart, sending out those photons, I believe it's doing many things that we just haven't even measured yet. But yes, it does create a more suitable container to facilitate transformation.
It goes back to this thing of, again, you might get someone saying, well, that's just common sense. The answer is, yeah, it is. But have you measured it? When we measure it, then suddenly, where we began with this conversation, then suddenly when someone says, well, I want to be more coercive. And as you said, why does coercion work? Well, it works to a degree, but it's limited. There's always a limiting factor. So if one wants to break through that glass ceiling of the limiting factor and go into real performance, real well-being, real lasting rehabilitation, then we're going to need a different approach.
Mm.
If we can measure why the it's just common sense thing works, then we have a coherent argument for saying that's where the science, the funding for studies needs to go. That's where government policy needs to go. That's why we don't hit kids in school anymore. That's why if you now get seen whipping your horse, in the Olympics, it's not going to go over well. Whereas 40 years ago, maybe no one would have cared so much. Things get better because people measure the commonsensical things. It's really important that people measure the commonsensical things. Otherwise, the non-commonsensical things like fanaticism become the norm. And it's easy to forget that we're moving out of that in our own culture. When I was at school, I was beaten regularly. That's not that long ago. Now it doesn't happen anymore. It largely doesn't happen because people went and did studies about why beating kids doesn't actually make them learn better, and then can lead to all sorts of problems later in life that might cost the government money. Because if I'm drinking myself to death because of, trauma that I had earlier, well, then that's going to have a public health cost, and that's going to have a this cost and a that cost and a blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And governments do look at these things. Interestingly, we often think that it's all a status quo and you're never going to drain the Washington swamp. But actually, I would posit that policy becomes more and more progressive because I've seen it in my lifetime. And it's because of things like HeartMath.
Mm.
I would also posit that within the equine assisted world, we've gone from the type of bossy pony club grandmother who meant very, very well that I grew up with in England, but who scared the shit out of us as kids. And then you put that kind of person together with a highly sensitive autistic person in a therapeutic riding environment.
Mm.
And just the sheer body language, just the set of the shoulders, just the tone of voice that person uses without even knowing that they use them, shuts down and freaks out the very person that is, quote unquote, their patient.
Mm.
Just quickly, it was, I think, in the 1870s or 1880s that bedside manner got studied in the UK. And then they realized that, yes, if you had a good bedside manner, your patients tended to recover. And if you didn't, they tended to die, despite how brilliant you were as a doctor. Empathy, compassion. So, yes, we need these studies. You were going to say something.
I was, because you mentioned when you have a caregiver who is coming in with this tone of voice or posture. Tone of voice and posture are things that we can hear and see with the known senses. And I would argue that what we're talking about with HeartMath, what horses feel and what those who are autistic feel, is even beyond that. It's the energy that's sent forth in the unseen that, again, we are not yet really in the habit of taking and tracking into account and measuring. So the thoughts of the other individual, the energy in the auric field that they carry around them,
Or the
is
photons
something
or
that's
lack
being
of coming out of
percepted.
the heart. Yes.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Exactly. And so when people talk about a horse, is going by who shies at the same place all the time or is looking at, there's nothing there. What's wrong with you? What's to say that they're seeing only things that are in 3D, right? They're perceiving something that's unseen. And I think that that's the beauty of what I love is I was drawn to those things that are unseen, and HeartMath has helped give a little bit of language and vocabulary to describe some of that mystery and make it less mysterious. And then this other that you mentioned is really important is we all have to breathe anyway, right? So might as well breathe through our hearts. It's complementary. I was very, very ashamed and embarrassed to talk about the HeartMath woo-woo New Age California stuff that I was doing. I didn't tell anybody about it for nearly 2 decades until it was slowly extracted out of me.
Yeah.
So this is something that you can do very subtly wherever you go. And that's what is beautiful about it, whether you're an Olympian or whether you are working with racehorses or whether you're working in hospital, whether you're working with research scientists as your relative. We all can be aware of the power of our heart and the
Indeed.
impact that it has.
It's also true with all the stuff that's non-equine assisted. So I think this is one of the reasons why psychotherapy often falls short. When one is in a sort of sitting, you're the therapist and I'm sitting here, and you're not saying anything, and you're just asking questions and you're writing in your notebook. This creates such a disempathetic power dynamic that I become afraid of you really fast. And I become afraid of saying the wrong thing. I probably want to please you. That comes from fear. How can this work? And then I ran into this with ABA, discrete trial ABA, with my kid in the early years, where we had these very coercive behavioral therapists who were not only upsetting him, but if we questioned anything, became really aggressive towards us. It's like, it's clear in front of your eyes to this therapist that this child is trying to escape from the room that you're in. If I was in a round pen with a young horse and it was trying to climb out over the bars, I'd change something because I might get killed, just purely practical. Even if I wasn't feeling any empathy, I would certainly feel enough empathy to myself to get the hell out of there and look at some sort of change of approach. Why aren't you? Well, because you're physically bigger than this kid, so you can't coerce them. So we're moving from that era of coercion, even though that coercion was often coupled with good intentions, which has come out without. I'm grateful that you drew the distinction within, or you drew that historical line within the USA of, yes, people wanted to break with things that were less good about Europe when they came here, but at the same time, they brought a lot of things with them that they actually wanted to use oppressively and couldn't quite get away with in Europe as well. There were both. And that stream of that skein rather of extremism and hardline coercion became, I think, wired into the American psyche.
With one of the world's largest genocides, absolutely.
Right. And Europe did the same thing. Go figure. It came from there. But nonetheless, if we can accept that that's what we're moving away from, the witch burnings, the 30 Years' War, the wiping out of the Native Americans, the Holocaust, and we are saying that in the last 85 years, which is really all it is, we are trying to stop doing what we've been doing for the last 10,000 years, well, then we haven't done a bad job. And those of us who are involved in this line of work, I think we're quite fortunate because we've seen rapid change. And people like you, as heart math practitioners, I would argue are in the front row of that rapidity because you're involved in something that has a foot both squarely in the esoteric and squarely in the oteric. I don't know what's the opposite of esoteric. In the teric.
Good
I don't know.
question.
We
Right.
should. And while
Teric,
you were,
yeah, because teric has to do with the earth, right?
yes,
Terra. Yeah,
exactly. And of course, there's much magic in to do with the earth. That's what
certainly,
geomancy is.
certainly.
While you were talking, I was looking at a in PubMed, where they publish medical studies. In 2025, Robert McCraty from HeartMath Institute,
Rollin. Dr.
Rollin McCraty, you're absolutely right, with Jorina Elbers, published in the Global Advances in Integrative Medicine and Health, which is a peer-reviewed thing, from dysregulation to coherence, exploring the HeartMath approach to emotional and physiological regulation. So anyone who wants a kind of latest type study should go check this one out. Mounting evidence suggests that the long-term effects of trauma and adversity are rooted not only in psychological distress, but in persistent dysregulation of the body's stress response and its associated neuroendocrine systems, are hormones.
Mm-hmm.
And then, okay, we sort of go to the bottom. Well, what were the outcomes of the study? And got to scroll down a fair old bit because these studies are quite long. Conclusion: the effects of chronic stress, trauma, and adversity are reflected in the dysregulation of neuroendocrine and other physiological systems, contributing to a spectrum of physical and mental health issues across the lifespan. So the idea of someone might be going through your equine assisted practice for 6 months, a year, but we're talking about a lifespan here that we might be part of. Heart rate variability has emerged as a valuable stress biomarker, offering insights into autonomic activity and its association with various mental and physical health conditions. The therapeutic application of heart rate variability coherence biofeedback presents a promising avenue for mitigating the clinical consequences of dysregulation, demonstrating efficacy in treating stress, anxiety, depression, and even chronic diseases. Regular practice using heart rate variability coherence biofeedback and HeartMath's self-regulation techniques over time can cultivate the state of coherence, establishing a new inner baseline that promotes physiological and emotional regulation and a roadmap to greater health. That's interesting. Continued exploration of the mechanisms that underlie the physiological impact of coherence and its long-term effects will deepen our understanding of this intervention. Ultimately, the integration of HeartMath self-regulation techniques and heart rate variability coherence biofeedback into therapeutic practices, that's us, represents a noteworthy advancement, empowering individuals with a safe, non-invasive, that's interesting too. So no putting stuff into people, no mouth swabs, and effective tool to enhance emotional and physiological well-being. These, I guess, were the heart rate variability monitors that you were talking about earlier. All right, so how do we begin? I'm sitting here in Derbyshire, England. I'm sitting here in central Slovakia, and I'm running a equine assisted practice, and I'm listening to Rupert bang on and wishing that he'd stop talking and let Kansas talk more. So their question is going to be, how do I start?
Right. So I teach classes online and I do it from the equestrian's point of view. So even though I'm HeartMath certified trainer and I'm also at the same time training these HeartMath tools to individuals who are in rehab and treatment programs, to veterans who are not equestrians, I also have my entire career that is built on working with horses. And we haven't got to this point yet, but in 2008, I started working with Ariana Strozzi Mizuki, and that ended up being my first deliberate foot on the path of the horse as healer industry. And so I became an equine guided educator. She mostly focused on working with a trauma-informed approach and also in leadership development and skills. That was more the demographic served. And then I've always been very passionate about working with women, specifically with women's health and navigating through all of the different roles that women carry. And so I teach those courses online. And there's also more information about HeartMath and all of its research. You were reading like 2 articles today, but there's actually several hundred different
Yeah.
peer-reviewed research articles at heartmath.org. And sometimes it's focusing on different, diseases or dysautonomia and whatnot, and its impact on
What's
those. And sometimes
dysautonomia?
when the autonomic nervous system can't regulate
Okay.
has a and actually I'm not going to be the real authority on dysautonomia. I have colleagues who are heart math trainers who are also more skilled in that domain, and they've shared how it's helped their dysautonomia. But it has an impact on many different it exhibits in many different ways in terms of health, right? And wellness. And so the research that you're able to explore is interesting for the head, but the experiential education that we feel, that we practice, that we go through, just like you can read books about riding, but you actually have to get in the saddle. You can watch movies that are lovely about horses, but it's not until you actually own one and you're out there, shoveling poo every day and your body's getting used to being around livestock that you really begin to integrate and embody those type of teachings. And so what I do is through one-on-one coaching and through my online courses, I invite people to start to learn how to live from the heart. What does that actually mean? What does it feel like? If you want to buy a device, we definitely can work with those inner balance HeartMath biofeedback devices. But the beauty is you don't have to. Spent so much time. Horses, if you're around nature, are one form of biofeedback. And the natural world sometimes, again, this is a really important point. So when I started doing equine therapy, I was always thinking, gosh, it's quite tragic that people who don't have access to horses can't get this, and that people who've had a taste of it might not be able to create that regularly due to circumstances and resources and all of that not being available. And so this to me was a take home tool to continue to have a level of that felt resonance. So even for your listeners in the moment, listening wherever they are, right now in this moment, come back into that heart focus. Bring your attention into the area around the heart, the chest area. And as you're breathing, breathe in through the heart and out through the heart, just imagining that the flow is coming in and out of that intrinsic cardiac nervous system, the tiny heart brain. And I want you to connect with the gratitude that you have for Rupert and his information and all of the wonderful presenters and teachers that he has on not just his podcast, but at his farm, and perhaps through all of the different books that he's been able to sprinkle like seeds throughout the planet. Or if you've had any mentors in your life who have touched you, teachers, even in the form of those nonverbal, either in 2-legged or 4-legged form. Wisdom comes through many different avenues, and just begin to breathe gratitude for all of the wisdom that you've learned through life experience. And breathe that feeling of gratitude in through the heart and out through the heart. And as an act of service, just imagine that you're sharing that with anyone here now who doesn't have yet all of those capacities, maybe doesn't have the community where they feel connected. Just imagine that you're radiating out from the warmth of your heart those 100,000 protons, that your power spectrum has meaningful impact. Just like the rays of the sun can lift the density of clouds, your heart power has an impact. And the visceral experience that you have right now, give gratitude to your own heart for bringing you here in this moment. And for each and every interaction that we have, it's really a gift. It's teaching us through lived experience. So we can taste gratitude. We can also taste compassion. We can taste the subtle nuanced difference of forgiveness. or patience or ease, and explore how each of those feel and how they really color our days. So, Rupert, you paint so many beautiful masterpieces through your words, and the invitation is that we can also create masterpieces through the resonance of our heart and the field that we carry with us wherever we go. And it really does cross cultural lines. It crosses borders. It even crosses timelines. And I love that this system, for those who are feeling dysregulated, it can create a sense of regulation. For those who are feeling like they're helpless to make a change, I would say no. As long as you have a heart, no matter what your physical state is, no matter what your situational state is, you can have impact. And we all do. So thank you so much, Rupert, for having me on. Thank you to all the listeners here, because I know that they are, without a doubt, lighting a small fire in their communities, in their homes, just through acts of being attentive, present, and truly caring, connected to your care. It makes a big difference. So what's HeartMath doing? They're measuring your care.
That was very beautiful. And obviously, I'm very honored by the kind words too. Thank you. Those are caring. And those heal aspects of myself that need healing. So thank you. I'm grateful for that.
Mm. And so I'm curious to share a little bit your state, because we spend so much time in language, we get busy, but from observation, it looks as though this has created a pause that's just a little bit more receptive in a softer way of listening.
From me,
Mm.
sure. There's one of the things about podcasting is that there's an energy to it where you're alert, highly alert, because you know that your job, if you're the podcaster, is to help to bring out the story and the value of that story. So you must be in this state of alertness. And at the same time, you must listen deeply. Striking the balance is moment to moment.
Mm.
And it's also necessary that the balance tips and goes like this, because that reflects real life. So if one was in a state of absolute deep listening all the time, there would be no podcast, because there'd be no conversation, because that would be a different dynamic. That would be more like a guided meditation. At the same time, there's nothing wrong with a guided meditation, which is to a large degree what you just very generously gave to us there. And at the same time, one has to have a dynamic. And that, I think, is absolutely true of, let's say, one's doing an equine assisted session of some sort. One is dancing between many of these variables, including one wants to be of service. There might be some goals, some stated goals. You want to offer value to the person that you are serving, to their family. That's value of experience, value for money, value of actual measured well-being, and, solutions to dilemmas. There can be a certain pressure on you for this. You might be under some time pressures too. you're managing the horse. You've got to keep people alive, which no matter how well trained your horse is, there's always a certain variable when one's dealing with large livestock and what can come into their nervous systems.
Mm.
And then there's the need to listen, because of that, deeply to the horse, deeply to the person you're serving, deeply to yourself, and deeply to the environment around you. And I think that's going on when one's podcasting too. But it means that, yes, the energy can be more here, and perhaps needs to be, in order so that some things can get communicated, not forgotten. One's writing notes and let's make sure we return to this thing and clarify that point and all those things. The journalistic side. That's also part of service, to try and make sure that questions get answered, and and at the same time it requires that deep listening. What you just did there made me think perhaps I need to restructure the way I go about some of these interviews. Between your song and what you just did for us allows more of a felt experience for the people who interact with this podcast, which means that they could take more tangibly away than if we just limited it to discussion. So thank you. You've given me pause for thought, because and a couple of ideas.
So this is an interesting byproduct that's well documented, because HeartMath has also researched a lot, extensively in fact, about intuition. And when we are connected to coherence, we get connected to our creative aspects and our intuition, to our intuitive guidance. And so we get different downloads. That's the channeling aspect in a way, right? When I said we all channel. And so these ideas come from a nonlinear place when we're connected to a deeper sense of heart resonance, such as connecting to what we care about, or really feeling that, figure 8 of consciousness, that feedback loop you have. We're not only feeling the resonance of you and I here, but we're feeling the quantum resonance of all the beings who will ever listen to this at any given time in this moment, as it kind of folds on itself. And so, and the song that I spoke about, that creates that rhythm as well with the breath. When we have our breathing pattern is more full, right? And what I would also share is that this particular technique, and I go through how it can be incorporated into any given program and practice with your horses or within a therapeutic larger offering for clients, is we have a form of prep. If you have people coming, you set the table. If you have people coming to your barn, you rake it up and, put away the poo sometimes to make it look ready and present. Rupert's eyes got wired, but okay, there's a way of
Note to self: when
preparation, whatever
Kansas
it is.
comes,
Even
rake up the poo. Yes, got it.
no, okay, even to like set up the flip chart or get the
Um,
saddle out,
of
right? We're going to
course.
use our
Yeah,
tack. So it's
absolutely.
prepped. So another form of prep is to lay the resonant foundation of the energetic, and to set the tone, if you will. And that's something that we can do as tone setters. It's absolutely something that the shamans will do when they know that you're coming, even though you haven't sent an email. And then they're
Yeah.
like, okay, Rupert's going to be on his way. I'm going to set the tone for the resonance here with the guides, and boop, 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 boop. And they're working with all this energetics of earth, air, fire, and water, and bringing in the elements. It's an absolute purposeful act. And so us as monkeys, as mortals in this human world, I'm not a shaman, but I've learned this very simple technique to be able to set the tone as a form of prep, to set the field resonance. So how do I want the horse to feel when I'm having an interaction, when I'm training together? And I know very clearly I want harmonious connection. That's paramount. I want them to feel respect. I want them to feel my appreciation. And so before I work with a group, either four-legged or two-legged, I'm going to get very clear about what my motivation is, and then do these micro meditations to connect with that feeling and send that forth. And I love the fact that we've got this image of 100,000 protons. When we talk about, oh, I'm going to send your light, we can kind of say it in a casual way that isn't as grounded in reality. And this is a technique that grounds it in reality. And it's
There might even be some
complementary to
Germans
what you're
running around
already
measuring
doing.
it as it comes out of your heart. Yes.
Right, soon. Yeah, exactly. We'll have a little, that's the scribes. Where's Merlin's assistants? Bring them along. Yeah, it's fun. It's exciting. And then we'll go out and play. What is the resonance of play? That absolutely has a felt sense and a texture to it.
Yeah, we
Anyway,
never call
more.
our sessions therapy. We always call them play dates. I met a child that wanted therapy. Never. I met a child that wanted to play every day.
Always.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I meet horses that want to play every day. Playfulness is, I think, something we should return to in another conversation, because that's
This
what,
is what I loved about the
yeah,
horse ranch, because
yeah,
ultimately we were learning how to play and do amazing things. But I've got the risk management down, so to do it safely, which is why we want to collaborate together,
yeah,
because I know there's some of these Cossack exercises that we can take off the battlefield into the
100%.
playground and have a great time.
100%, 100%. I mean, it's the same thing. The classical system that we use to train our horses, because it makes them safe, balanced, and also able to give
Perfect.
oxytocin to a rider,
Yes.
was originally developed partly to work livestock and partly in battle for hand-to-hand, combat. So we can decide how we want to use it, just the same as with your
Mm.
Cossack riding. We can use it to harm our fellow man, or we can use it to heal our fellow man. That's really up to us. It's the same system. Same with martial arts. You can use them to heal or to harm. But knowing the technology is useful. So yes, we're going to collaborate. So listen, listeners, viewers, there's going to be stuff. We're going to do stuff. We're going to be doing stuff that this is being recorded in May 26th. By May, June 27, hopefully, no, certainly, me and Kansas are going to do our first gig. It'll happen in the Sierra Nevadas of California, because that's where she lives. So horses are there. Then we will also do some stuff in Europe. So come along and attend. And what we're also going to do, we've touched on so many things in this conversation that we couldn't fully develop. So what I want to do is now a little series of, say, maybe 20-minute conversations that we'll do about various aspects of horsemanship and horse training, and how we can bring these practices into it. What meditations, what prayers, what actual physical techniques, how do we create a mishmash that actually works situation by context. So if you're up for that, those are going to be appearing on YouTube too. And if you need more Kansas in your life, and you'd be sort of insane if you didn't, then Kansas, can you give us the touch points for how people can get in contact with you, take courses with you that have
Sure.
nothing to do with me, that are just purely Kansas?
Sure. Yeah, the primary place to reach out is at circuscowgirl.com, which is part of this kind of, trick riding performance world. And at some point, it might shift in something that is a little bit more focused on the heart-based horsemanship, which is really the technique that I'm kind of developing and teaching my heart coherence classes. So circuscowgirl.com. I never did social media, but I was, kind of dragged onto it kicking and screaming. So there is a Facebook page. It's not really something that I'm very deft at, so it doesn't have that much in terms of what social media people do, I guess, but every once in a while I'll throw something up there as well.
But people
So
can
there's a
also
Facebook.
contact you through that. They can message you through that.
Always. Yeah,
Yeah.
Facebook Messenger is not my primary means of method, because like I said, I don't have it on my phone for very specific reasons, and I might go weeks at a time without
You
going
mean you
on
don't
to
want things
Facebook.
going dip at 3 o'clock in the morning? Oh, I can't.
Yeah.
Really, Kansas.
I have enough things this is a weapon of mass distraction that already I have to get its tentacles out of my brain regularly and do some shamanic cord cutting. Okay.
From time to time.
So, yes, and just very simply, you can reach out by email, and I have an easy email address. It's kansascarradine@gmail.com.
KansasCarradine@gmail.com. Carradine could be spelled like 8,000 ways. So how do we spell Carradine?
Carradine. So
Right.
instead of Carradine, which helps it phonetically, which you had said at the beginning of our call, it is
Sorry.
Carradine.
Well, I'm
Yeah,
British,
it's
and we invented the
Irish.
language. So we said, it's got a long I. So,
Right, right.
yeah. Anyway, sorry, apologies.
All good.
Kansas Carradine,
Yeah,
even though it's spelled Carradine, at Gmail. Kansas like
at
the state.
Gmail.
Yeah,
Yep.
such a great name.
Yep. Yeah. And I
All
do
right.
in-person clinics as well as a lot of these one-on-one phone sessions because the beauty is we don't have to be in physical proximity to be able to
Yeah.
get that felt sense. We all had it right here. We're connected to that
Something I would
right
also
across.
say, listeners and viewers, you can contact her about heart math stuff, obviously, and mental health stuff and all of this good stuff, but horse training stuff too. So here's a little full disclosure. I gave a course in taquine, which is one of our equine assisted methods, in Idaho a couple of years ago. Kansas attended with her daughter Bodhi. There were some variables which made me very grateful for the fact that I had a horse person of such high caliber to help out. Even though she was supposed to be there as a client, she actually was a co-facilitator. She just ended up paying for it and not getting paid. So we need to reverse that dynamic somehow. So the quality of the horsemanship learned through these high pressure situations in the Riata Ranch and at Cavalia, which everyone knows about Cavalia and the high standard it had, are very
Well,
real.
and some people may not, right? So
It's
we're getting
true.
into a new generation because our last show was in 2018. We
It's
were trying
true.
to mount a show in 2020 in China, but the pandemic put a squash on all that. But it was a melange of many different disciplines. So
Yeah.
we have old style circus, generation bareback riders doing Rosenback riding, and then European classical dressage, and or mostly French classical dressage, but very much in Nuno's lineage, as well as American style trick riders, but then riders from Kyrgyzstan, Kazakh riders. We had Spanish and Australian. And so from all over the world, everybody came together and we all listened and observed and witnessed and worked on each other's, interdisciplinary aspects. So it was a great education to work with, liberty, lightness as always being paramount, honoring the horse as to the highest order that we can. And my dream within that show, it was under a huge white tent. It was the largest touring show at the time, like I said, with about either 70 to even 90 head of horses. And I always felt like this is a shamanic experience. It's getting people into their hearts. It was emotionally evocative with the music and seeing the horses. So people said that, especially with the first show with Fred Pignon and Magali Delgado, that everybody would come and it was this catharsis, this cathartic experience, because it really was transformative about the power of the human and horse relationship as being so sacred and special. And that's because we're Eurocentric, because in other places you could do it with elephants and create amazing things.
Yeah, well, you go with your ancestors. I saw that show. I saw that show with Frederick Pignon, Magali Pignon, and I presume you. I just didn't know you were in it at the time, and I was transported. I've seen lots of amazing equestrian spectaculars of one sort or another. They're all phenomenal. That one, I walked away changed. I think it fundamentally changed. It was a formative experience for me in my horse education,
Mm.
and if only to show what's possible. It made me realize that I didn't need to have limits to, yeah, how I perceived the whole thing. And so I'd say it massively informed what turned into Horseboy. Yeah,
Beautiful.
so you had a hand in that, Kansas. All right. So circuscowgirl.com, send her an email, and Kansas Carradine, sorry, at Gmail, and her Facebook page. Just look her up on Facebook. Contact her about all these things. Look out for the stuff we're going to do in 2027. Those are the plugs. All right, lads. Is there anything more you would like to add? Kansas before we?
Just big
Right.
gratitude. I think we kept adding and adding, so
We
we'll talk
did.
again.
All right. Okay, till the next time.
I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. If you like what we're doing here, please do like, subscribe, tell a friend. It so helps us to get this valuable work done and the message of equine assisted stuff out there. And if you're interested in more conversations, you might want to check out our Live Free, Ride Free podcast. And if you'd like to support the podcasts, please go to rupertisaacson.com and click on the Patreon link. If you're a professional in the equine assisted field or are considering a career in the equine assisted field, you might want to check out our 3 certification programs: Horseboy Method, Movement Method, and Taquine Equine Integration. You can find all of those over on newtrailslearning.com. And finally, if you want to check out our cool rock and roll themed merch, back on rupertisaacson.com, please click on shop. You'll find all kinds of fun goodies there. And if you're looking for a way to spend time until the next podcast, you might want to consider reading the books that kicked all this off: The Horseboy, The Long Ride Home, and The Healing Land. So see you next time on Equine Assisted World. Join us for the adventure.